Well, thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to be interviewing Paul Stocco, who's a long-term board member with CanBIM. Paul's been contributing to the board for many years now. He's a very well-respected lawyer practicing law in Alberta. He's had a really seasoned career. He's been practicing for over 30 years. He's argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. And he's a guy that brings a lot of wisdom and insight to how the industry operates to the board, and has really helped us to steer this organization in the right direction for many years now. So really appreciate this conversation with Paul. I hope you enjoy it. I'm here with Paul Stocco, who's a longtime board member with CanBIM. Excited to talk to Paul. As you know, we're doing a series of interviews with CanBIM's leadership. Paul is a seasoned lawyer. He's been practicing construction law for how long, Paul?
Close to 30 years, Tom.
Many months, many months. And Paul is an expert. He's a litigator. He's an expert in construction law. He's based in Alberta. Excited to talk to Paul. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here, Tom.
So maybe I try to do a bit of an introduction there. Maybe you can fill in the blanks.
Well, as you mentioned, I've been practicing for 30 years. My career started in Toronto, and then in 2000 I moved out to Edmonton. And as I mentioned before, and other times I've given talks, I've managed to see the ebbs and flows of the economy, recessions, boom times, lived through all of it, litigated through all of it. And there's no end in sight for all of us. So excited to be here, excited to share some of my thoughts and answer some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I mean, over your career, 30 years practicing construction law, what have you seen? I mean, there's obviously been a big shift. I mean, from my perspective in the industry, from moving from like adversarial contracts, lump sum models to more collaborative IPD, P3, CM procurement models. What have you seen over the 30 years? How have things evolved?
Well, because we're talking about BIM, and that's part of our conversation, I've certainly seen a greater emphasis on technology and the use of technology. BIM is just one example. 30 years ago, it was unheard of to see a construction superintendent or foreman walking around the project with a handheld device. It was unheard of to have paperless projects. It was unheard of to have digital photographs, drone photography, 3D scanning, which we are seeing quite commonplace for today. So better keeping a track of records and the more fulsome integration of technology into construction projects, both in terms of how they plan and how they execute projects. I think we've also seen over the past 30 years huge increases in the dollar values of projects.
Yeah.
You know, where a project used to be hundreds or tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars was quite uncommon. We're seeing billions of dollars now. For example, here in Calgary, we've got the Calgary Cancer Center, $1.4 billion. You've got LRT, light rail transit, public infrastructure projects that are easily exceed billions of dollars. So along with that comes obviously an increase in sophistication, but an increase in risk. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I've managed to see over, and I think we've all seen that in the industry over the last 30 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned some of it, but I mean, there's obviously been a huge uptick in the use of technology on project sites. That's a lot more data than we used to collect. There's a tremendous amount of information. I'm sure that's changed the way that when you go through a discovery on a problem, all the information that you have at your disposal now that sort of illustrate how problems unfolded. So from your perspective, do you think that the use of technology is like proactively reducing the chance for litigation on average, or how do you think all this technology is affecting how disputes emerge?
Right. So good question. Certainly from what I do, what lawyers do, technology helps in allowing us to comb through piles and piles and piles of information and data. So it's not uncommon to use artificial intelligence to help review the digital files for any project. And as you know, they can be significant. But technology is a tool, right? It's a tool in how we plan. It's a tool in how we execute. And I don't think you can rely on technology to necessarily change attitudes towards disputes or dispute resolution. The construction industry and the construction projects, unfortunately, conflict is always going to be part of the equation, whether it's in the digital age or in the dark ages. People always end up getting into arguments or disputes. Technology is a tool to facilitate a discussion. And I don't think there's anything that should supplement or supplant good communication, good effective early communication and addressing disputes. Attitudes towards dispute resolution have to change. We've tried to get people to look at disputes differently. We've tried to engage different forms of contract models and you mentioned, for example, integrated project delivery, where project success is put ahead of individual success because project success will drive individual success. But the return to those old ways of thinking is sort of what underscores and animates a lot of disputes. So it's the change in mindset that we have to focus on. And I don't think that we're there yet. Technology is a tool, maybe help us get there, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great answer. You know, we've seen some trends in construction law with new contracts emerging. We also see some trends in like new legislation in Ontario. There's this prompt payment legislation that just came out in the past couple of years, and it's, you know, cash is king, and a lot of issues arise from sub-trades just not getting paid on time, not having the cash flow to maintain their business and make payroll, et cetera. And that prompt payment legislation is supposed to address that to help to make sure that the trades are getting paid, so they don't run into issues where they don't have the cash to finish work and et cetera. So that's happened. That's evolved in Ontario. Do you see that spreading across Canada? What's your perspective on that in Alberta?
Yeah, absolutely. What has started in Ontario has certainly been embraced here in Alberta. And in fact, we've got currently we've passed an amendment to the Builders Lien Act here in Alberta that incorporates changes to the Builders Lien process, but also incorporates prompt payment processes that we've learned and adopted from Ontario. It's anticipated that the legislation will come into force in July of 2021, so just in a handful of months. Of course, Alberta has been, like the rest of Canada, has been preoccupied with something called COVID. But notwithstanding that, we've learned the lessons from Ontario. So some of the things that we're going to incorporate here, for example, just on the builder's lien side, we're going to allow for longer lead times for registration times for builder's liens. We're going to go from 45 to 60 days. We're going to incorporate prompt payment processes. We're going to incorporate and include the adjudication model where payment disputes are dealt with. There's a decision made during the course of the project. We're going to incorporate timing provisions for mandatory payment obligations after invoices are issued. So these legislative changes, as you say, are designed to facilitate the quick, more timely, and efficient flow of money, because money seems to be at the root of all these disputes.
Yeah,
I've certainly seen that. Some of the other things that, or one of the big problems, or that we have seen with the flow of money is we've seen many contracts here in Alberta that rely on and incorporate pay when paid provisions. So effectively, if you are a payor, let's say you're a general contractor, you've got to pay a sub. If you don't get paid by your owner client, there's no legal obligation on you to pay your subcontractor client. And of course, that causes hardships. We've got case law that addresses the effectiveness of those clauses. But now the government here in Alberta has said, we're going to ban and prohibit the use of those kinds of clauses.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So doesn't that force the general contractor then to carry and like fund the project, because they're going to have enough cash on hand just to be in business to pay subs when the owners aren't paying?
Well, but the owner will also be subject to the prompt payment obligations as well, right? So whenever an invoice is issued, the Alberta legislation says whenever that invoice is issued, it's going to be mandatory 28 days that you must pay that invoice. Mm-hmm. So again, it's designed to flow funds through and eliminate the stranglehold on cash flow on the projects. So there's also going to be another interesting change that we're going to watch for, more timely release of holdback. As you know, the 10% statutory holdback in some instances is held on to for years.
Yeah.
There's going to be a more sequential release of that holdback as the project moves through its various phases. Again, designed to flow funds through. And hopefully it's going to bring about some real significant changes to cash flow in the industry and hopefully eliminate those kinds of disputes that can be tackled.
Yeah, I think there's tremendous amount of opportunity to streamline the process of procurement overall. From your perspective, I mean, you've dealt with, in your career, I'm sure you've dealt with hundreds or thousands of disputes, and that's your core business, right? So if you were to kind of think about root causes of disputes on projects, like maybe give us some ideas of what the top root causes are and how they're avoidable.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter what decade you practice in this area. One of the root causes is performance. If you don't perform your contractual obligations, you're going to have a problem. We all know that. So at the end of the day, you've got a contract, you've got obligations, whether it's the payment obligation or whether it's the actual construction obligation. If you fail to perform, you're going to have problems. So that's going to be consistent. Yeah. How do you address those other sorts of things? To my mind, there's got to be more timely, and I mentioned this earlier in my opening comments, there's got to be more timely, effective, efficient communication between the parties. People have to be invested in tackling problems as they arise and getting the right person at the right level of seniority with the right decision-making authority to tackle those problems and those disputes. We're starting to see that.
And that's also tied in, like communication's tied into understanding scope. I mean, if the root cause is performance, potentially the supplier didn't understand what they were supposed to do, or it wasn't well described, and therefore they had a different idea of what they were supposed to do.
Well, absolutely. But we're starting to see those kinds of issues with either scope or performance-related issues really addressed by the new contract models, right? Yeah. And we talked about this before, the IPD, where there's an incentive for all to resolve things early, and so that individual success isn't the focus, but it's the project.
Or bringing the builders into the process earlier so they can be part of creating that scope in the first place, so that what's proposed is actually possible and can be done in the time and budget that's allowed.
Absolutely. So new ways of looking at project planning, project execution, that is going to spill over into how we tackle disputes. And I guess if I had a crystal ball, these are sorts of things that we would ideally like to see if we could change the industry.
Yeah.
But we're starting to get their inches right now.
Well, that's kind of my good segue to my next question. I mean, we've thinking about how we contract currently, and the CCDC documents, and publishing things in trade newspapers, and all this sort of antiquated ideas around how we procure and distribute risk across the industry to actually realize a building. I mean, if you could just blow the whole thing up and start over in blue sky vision on how the industry should operate, what the mechanism should be, how companies and organizations should be formed to work together, or maybe it's just one giant entity. What do you think? I mean, if you could start fresh from the ground up, how would you conceive the industry to work most efficiently from a contracting and risk perspective?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because if all risk is eliminated, my God, what would I end up doing? Probably selling somewhere at a hardware store.
You wouldn't change a thing.
We wouldn't want that, no, would we? We've always talked about assigning risk to the party who's most capable and most able to bear it. That expression, it sounds great, but it's getting perhaps a little bit tired. It's impossible, Tom, to really know, at least in my view, to understand what is the best party to assume certain kinds of risk. Because as we've lived, at least I've lived through the last 30 years, as the economy ebbs and flows, different parties decide to take on different risks at different times because of different motivations. We've seen here, for example, times of boom and bust in Alberta. I'm sure that's the same thing. I know it's the same thing in Ontario. And when work is scarce, and people are scrounging for work, you're prepared to take on any risk just to keep the lights on, and keep the wheels turning. When work is plentiful, and when prices, for example, for material and labor are quite dynamic and volatile, and we've definitely seen that here in Alberta, nobody would agree to certain kinds of contracts. You wouldn't agree to lump sum contract prices. You would agree to things like cost plus, because you just couldn't assume the risk of material or labor changes. So I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't think I have a crystal ball answer to how to blow up the industry. As the economy changes, so too will people's appetite for risk. I think that's what keeps the construction industry so vibrant, so dynamic, so exciting, sometimes so disappointing, but sometimes also so rewarding.
Yeah. Well, fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much for your time today. And also thank you so much for your contribution to leading CanBIM over the years. You've been involved with the board for how long now? Like eight years or so?
At least that amount of time. And I know that my interest is not waning. I think it's only picking up. There's a lot of new faces and new ideas that are on the board, but also part of our industry. And I think as we reach out to new partners and new people who are interested, I think this is a great dynamic place to be part of the conversation.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And look forward to talking again.
Thanks, Tom. Take care.
Well, thanks again, Paul, for taking the time to talk to us. I really loved having that conversation about blue sky vision for our industry. And that's really closely aligned with our mission here at CanBIM. We are trying to introduce technologies and innovations that can ultimately improve the way we operate as an industry. And we're hoping that by improving our productivity, by improving our efficiencies, ultimately we're going to create a better civilization that we can occupy. So I think construction law, how we transfer risk, how we communicate it across projects, the first principles on how we work together, these things have a huge effect on the overall outcome of our project. So thank you so much, Paul, for contributing over the years and for helping out with this interview. I just want to remind everyone, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. If you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, etc., please follow us. It really helps us to reach more people, to expand our network, to grow this community. And of course, the very best thing you can do is tell a friend. If you get value out of this, if this is something that was informative for you, please share it with other people. That's ultimately why we're putting it out there. And you can check out our website for more information if you want to get involved with the organization. Of course, awards are open till July 31st, just a reminder. And if you want to order a physical copy of this year's Innovation Spotlight, go on our website and order it. And lastly, I just want to thank all of our sponsors. Our members pay for this organization to exist, but our sponsors really fund the new initiatives. So thank you so much to our sponsors that make this possible. And I look forward to talking to you all in person, hopefully soon. Thanks. Building Transformations is a CanBIM production hosted by me, Thomas Strong, produced by Jerry Latman, visual and graphic effects by Allison Burgess, scripting by Joseph Watson, post-production supervision by Sergei Greshko, editing by Theodore Bazaar, and visual effects and editing by Musafar Malik.